this is something I've talked about a fair bit here and there, mostly because I disagree with pretty much everybody else on the subject, and that's pretty hard to do. I disagree with the far right, I disagree with the entire left, and I disagree with libertarians on pretty much everything to do with rights. So here's my take on what rights are, where they come from, and why they really just don't mean as much as people like to think that they do. So let's start with the right. They tend to think that rights come from some imaginary man in the sky that simply proclaimed them into existence, and therefore they just exist, no evidence required. It's just like the existence of their God. It doesn't really matter if it's true, it only matters if they believe it. And sorry, I'm not at all impressed with any of that. There's a reason for it, but it's the same reason everybody I disagree with has, so I'm going to wait until the end to reveal it. And then comes the left, and most people on the political left, at least in my experience, they simply assume that rights exist because they exist. They think they're innate, that they're just there. They have no idea where they came from, and they have no idea how they discovered them, but it just makes them feel good to think that these rights exist, and that's enough for them. But like the religious, I'm just not impressed by bald assertions. If you can't show that your ideas are valid, why should anyone believe you? And then there's the libertarians. The poor, far too often deluded libertarians who believe in natural rights, which really aren't that much different from what the liberals think. These rights just float around in the ether, and everyone has them because the libertarians say so. And again, this is just argument by assertion. They really want it to be true, therefore it has to be true. So there. And all of these groups are operating from the same logically fallacious position, and at least subconsciously, they're doing it for the same reason. None of them can actually support their moral system objectively, or debate the merits of their beliefs. They just want it to be true, and therefore they just declare it to be true, and everyone else has to play along. But reality doesn't work that way. Just because you're emotionally attached to your beliefs, that doesn't mean that your beliefs are actually so. It doesn't mean that anyone should listen to you based on your say-so, or the say-so of a philosopher, or a book. That's just an appeal to authority. Why should I believe your sources? None of these things have been shown to be factually true. So what is true? Well, at least in my opinion, none of it. There are no rights. At least if you're talking about some magical, mystical things that just float around in the ether, handed down by gods or nature or anything like that. Rights don't magically exist. They have to be created, and they're created by the only demonstrable intelligent creature we know of on this planet. Rights are created by us. And that bothers a lot of people because that means rights aren't universal and rights can change. And yes, they can. Welcome to reality. Because all you have to do is open your eyes and look around to see that rights vary based on culture and time. The rights that you might enjoy within a particular country might not exist in the next country over. The rights that you enjoy today might not exist in the future, and they probably didn't exist in the past. Rights, like morals, are a product of human civilization. We make them up because they benefit us. And when they stop being useful, we get rid of them and we make something else up. Rights are not set in stone, and they certainly can be changed. They can easily be changed. They're changed on a regular basis. Why are people so afraid to recognize that? I mean, even constitutional rights like we enjoy in the United States are subject to change. We could, if we wished, amend the Constitution to get rid of the First Amendment. We could eliminate free speech. We could go back to slavery. We could rescind a woman's right to vote. Will we? Almost certainly not. But we have a system in place to amend the Constitution, and if that was done, those rights would vanish into thin air. The idea that these rights exist magically is absurd, and this is made even more ridiculous by people who seem to think that because we have certain rights in America, that everyone everywhere has those rights. And I'm sorry, but that's laughably untrue. You go to the Middle East and demand your freedom of religion. They might fall over laughing, just before they behead you for heresy, and they'd be perfectly within their rights to do so. Because our rights here do not apply there, and vice versa. In fact, I'm continually shocked at how many people assume that First Amendment rights exist everywhere, even in the Western world. Yeah, most places in Europe are signatories to the European Convention on Human Rights, but nobody says they have to be. I mean, hell, in Germany, you can be punished for Holocaust denial. So much for free speech. In fact, just about every country has limitations to free speech. This is really where regressive political forces have been trying to stop anyone from making anyone else feel bad in recent years, and I personally think that's stupid. I mean, granted, there are some forms of speech that have to be penalized, like slander and espionage. Plus, you can't exactly have people perjuring themselves on the stand and then declaring it to be free speech just to get away with it. But mostly, I think people ought to be able to say whatever they want to say. Now, I mentioned morals in passing before, and honestly, I think rights and morals are almost identical in operation. We make them up to benefit society, and so long as they do so, and nothing better comes along, we tend to leave them alone. But once they start getting in the way, or once we think there's a better way of doing things, they get changed to something different. Rights are not static any more than morals are. So I guess one of the questions I have to those who believe in static rights, rights that just exist because they really want them to, is how do they know? Where did they get that idea? Because I've never known anyone to be able to provide a worthwhile answer to that question. Lots of people will point to an authority, be it a god, or a book, or a philosopher. But you do know that appealing to authority is a logical fallacy for a reason, right? But that really seems to be all that anyone has to point to. Blind faith in the words of some authority figure because it appeals to them on an emotional level. And I shouldn't have to point out how ridiculous that actually is. Just because you like an idea doesn't make that idea automatically good. Just because you enjoy a speaker doesn't make what that speaker has to say factually correct. And as I keep saying, it isn't the people that matter, it's their ideas that we need to pay attention to. The Bible isn't correct because you want it to be. It is correct if and only if the things it says correspond with demonstrable facts. I couldn't care less if you really agree with what some philosopher has to say. Their words only make a difference if they can actually be defended rationally and intellectually, and most of the time they just can't. And this is something that libertarians in particular try a lot. They trot out John Locke and Thomas Hobbes and other philosophers like that to somehow prove that their position has any validity. Of course, that doesn't actually prove anything. It just provides some guy's opinions and the particular philosophical spin they put on their views to try to convince others that it's right. But none of these people actually prove a damn thing. They just make the same kind of absurd, empty assertions about the state of rights and reality that modern libertarians do. The people on the left are probably the silliest, though, as they often have no sources whatsoever other than their own personal feelings. They'll come up with a world that they'd really like to live in, and then they assert that that's the world that actually exists. It all comes straight out of their ass. They often don't even recognize that they're doing it. I find that terribly sad. I really don't know what else to say on the subject of rights. I mean, all you have to do is open your eyes and look at the world objectively to see how things actually function. We see no evidence of gods or magical mystical rights. We just see people making decisions. So why is there a controversy? Why is there any debate over this issue? I just don't get it. But I guess I understand that people get their emotional knickers in a knot, and they really want to get their way, and when they don't, they just point fingers and place the blame elsewhere. Everyone else is wrong, and they're right because reasons, because assertions, because they want to be right, so there. But that's not how reality functions. Wishful thinking doesn't change anything. And maybe it's time more people put their emotions aside and just embrace the real world for what it actually is. It would sure solve a lot of problems, at least in my opinion. So, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Can you actually justify your position on rights objectively? Do you have evidence? I'd sure like to see it because so far, nobody's actually managed it. And I'm sure I'll get plenty of emotional backlash on this, as I often do, because I don't buy into people's emotional fanaticism. It doesn't make people happy. Well, too bad for you. Anyway, comment below, and I'll talk to you later.
Everything changes.